This episode is coming out a little earlier in the week than usual because it contains a crucial pre-Christmas message for the media. News executives, stop ignoring this huge story. The attacks and persecution against millions of Christians worldwide. Ahead, you'll hear why even I was shocked by the extent of the media's failure on this. Also, the media keeps getting something basic about Christmas wrong. Church leaders have called this out, but media folks keep doing it anyway to push their false narrative to the world. Also, an important lesson from Hanukkah, which starts this week too, and one of the most crucial lessons I learned about journalism in my early days came from covering Kwanzaa. But first, a new CNN disaster. The network aired a video saying basically, hey, look at us. We are there live as a Syrian prisoner gets freed. But of course, they did not bother to fact check or follow other basics of journalism. It turned out this person they were treating as some sort of innocent victim was most likely a torturer for the Assad regime who was lying to them. And they somehow missed obvious telltale signs. Also, the fact that cameras were running should concern you when it comes to your life and freedom and privacy. I'll explain. All that is coming up today on this very special Christmahanakwanzika episode of They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. I'm Josh Lebs, and this is They Stand Corrected, my podcast that fact-checks the news. I spent 20 years inside mainstream media, 10 on NPR and 10 on CNN, where I became lead on-air fact-checker. And during those years, I saw the tremendous problems that exist inside news operations, not just there, but across the mainstream news ecosystem. This show exposes those problems so we can push the media to do better, to stand for truth always, which requires two things: facts plus context. Along with the show, I have a newsletter. It's free. I encourage you to sign up for it. You can find it all at my website, joshlebs.com. Recently, I launched the Media Fail Awards, and your votes are coming in. Everyone can vote. Just go to mediafailawards.com, and that brings you over to the newsletter, where you click to decide which were the worst media fails of the year. The voting was extended, so you have until December 27th to get in those votes. And while you're there at the newsletter, you can go back and hear all these episodes in which I talked about these individual fails and what they mean for the news media. Let's jump right into this. I am going to be talking to you today about this crucial story that the media has been ignoring. But first, this was sent to me by a listener. Here is sound from a CNN report.
Is he going to shoot it?
It moved. Is there someone there?
This was from a report by Clarissa Ward. CNN aired this report saying that they had footage of a Syrian prisoner being freed now that the Bashar al-Assad government has fallen to these Islamist rebels. This so-called prisoner gave CNN a name, apparently, and claimed to have been locked up in a windowless cell for 3 months. Of course, CNN went to air with this report, showing Clarissa giving him water. She called it one of the most extraordinary moments she has witnessed in 20 years of reporting. Well, a group called Verify Psy tries to fact check what they see from Syria. They immediately spotted red flags in this report. Like, if this guy was really locked up for 3 months, why did he look pretty clean and well-groomed? Why were there no signs of torture or injuries, given what the Assad regime is known to have done to prisoners? Also, he said he had not been out of a windowless, locked room for 3 months. But when he stepped outside into the bright sun, he wasn't squinting or anything. These are things you look for. Anyway, this guy is now being identified as a notorious torturer for the Assad regime. He apparently gave him a fake name, and now he's running free. Apparently, he was locked up in that space, but we don't know for how long. And it was the result of a dispute over money with another corrupt torturer from the same regime. A listener sent me an article about this from the New York Post, one of many outlets covering what CNN did here. The report says this guy was involved in theft, extortion, and coercing residents into becoming informants for Assad, local residents told the fact checkers. Now, CNN is trying to downplay its own failures here. The network said in a statement that it's investigating and, quote, the events transpired as they appear in our film. That right there is what's called a self-own. How do you, the audience, benefit from seeing video that is rushed to air before they authenticate the identity of the person and try to learn more information? The answer is you don't. There is such a desperate rush to get clicks and views and positive feedback on Twitter and whatever. It's a little late now to investigate after you've already presented this guy as being rescued with you right there and he's gone. But this goes further. What if inside this place they had found someone who was the victim of the Assad regime? What if the person they saw had been tortured, injured, raped? What if they were undressed? What if they were dying and desperate? And in comes not only people to potentially rescue them, but also CNN with cameras. If heaven forbid something like that happened to you, would you want cameras there for a moment like that in your life, taking video of you to show the world? Now, I'm not saying that there's no circumstances in which news would take video, but if you decide to be there and take video for it, then afterward, you investigate everything you can. And if they are who they say they are, you go over with them what video they are comfortable sharing with the world. In this case, that didn't matter because apparently this guy ran off and who knows where he is now after everything he has done to people. There's also one more thing to say about this here. Reporters go into areas with no democracy, no freedom, and they talk to people. And they take whatever those people tell them and then report it as though it's a fact. This happens everywhere. It happens in Gaza constantly. Gazans say something and reporters like this repeat it without looking into it. So in this case, a group exposed what happened, but in most cases, it's never discovered. So this is not just about one mistake by CNN. This is a standard part of today's media failure coming under the spotlight. I'll be right back.
This is an absolutely amazing podcast. Josh Levs is a treasure and a wonderful source of information.
I just wanted to thank you for They Stand Corrected. It's just fantastic. Thank you for these tools and for your incredible work here.
If you are not listening to They Stand Corrected weekly, then you are doing yourself a disservice. Never before has a podcast like this been so necessary. Josh, keep up the good work.
I absolutely love your podcast.
I love what you're doing to prevent the democracy demolition of 24/7 toxic disinformation.
It's a highlight of my week every time it comes out because I know I'm going to learn something. You have made me a much more educated consumer of news.
Thank you so much to everyone sending in messages like this. To find out how you can do the same, get in touch. There's a form that's free and available to anyone to fill out. It's linked in the show notes. Recently, the Washington Post ran a story about some of the struggles that Christian people in Aleppo, Syria, are facing. It said that over 14 years of civil war, Aleppo's Christian population fell from 300,000 to just 25,000 as people fled the threat of violence and sought a better life. It also noted that back in 2013, 2 of the city's archbishops were kidnapped and their whereabouts are still unknown. Now that Islamist rebels have taken over Syria, it's not like everything's better.
There have been isolated incidents that call into question the group's commitment to moderation. Pastor Zani Bakr, a Kurdish Christian, said one of his parishioners was told by rebels to put on a hijab. She told them she was Christian, and they politely told her to wear one the next time she goes out, he said. Fears were most acute among recent converts, he said, who worry they may be put on trial for converting from Islam to Christianity.
This story was a big exception, very much not the rule. Over the past year, big news organizations have largely ignored the plight of Christians worldwide. First, I'll give you a sense of what's going on that you almost surely have not heard about from any of the big national mainstream news organizations. Here is the opening of a segment from November. This was on CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
In Nigeria, violent conflicts and persecution have forced millions of Christians from their homes. See how they're struggling to survive and how you can join with churches around the world to pray for the persecuted. Plus, in the U.S., historic injustice nearly destroyed Native American culture.
In that episode, anchor Wendy Griffith had a discussion with Jeff King, president of International Christian Concern.
It's largely unreported. This is the first I'm hearing about it. Tell us why Christians are being so attacked there in Nigeria.
It's so underreported. It's crazy.
He said the numbers are unclear, but every year thousands of Christians are killed in Africa. And he said millions have had their lands stolen by Islamists.
It is a stealth jihad. Radicals will come into a village, shoot it up, machete everybody, drive it out, take the land, day in, day out. And it never gets fixed. 20 years, they never go after the guerrillas, hardly ever. They can't be found somehow. And that's because the Islamists are in the government. So they're controlling the police, the army, and the intel agencies. The scale that's happening is just unbelievable.
I can't fact check these details for you. That's part of what happens when there isn't democracy in nations. You have an even harder time getting trustworthy facts and figures because the people can't demand a government that provides facts and figures. Here's what I can tell you. There are reports about this from multiple organizations that mainstream news agencies have cited in other contexts. All right, so for example, there's a report about this from Catholic News Agency. Well, Catholic News Agency has been quoted by big mainstream news organizations over the years, like the Associated Press or the New York Times, CNN. And there's reporting from other groups. One is called ACN International. There's another one called Open Doors. These organizations are quoted in mainstream news outlets. But when it comes to news coverage over the past year of the persecution of Christians worldwide, despite these same groups making this information available, the mainstream news organizations have pretty much ignored the fact that this is happening, this huge phenomenon affecting millions of Christian people. Here's some of what the reporting from the Catholic News Agency says. It discusses this report looking at 18 countries, not just in Africa. In more than 60% of those countries, human rights violations are up since the previous report 2 years ago. Ethnic and religious violence has claimed the lives of nearly 56,000 people in Nigeria alone over 4 years, and the victims are disproportionately Christian. Just a couple of months ago, quote, a devastating Islamic terrorist attack in Burkina Faso left at least 150 people dead. For several months, Islamic insurgents have increased their brutality and their determination to spread terror, which has allowed them to control about half the territory. I'm going to pause here for a second. Have you heard anything about this in any mainstream news organization? Now's a good time for me to tell you how I search the news. I have a bunch of different tools, but here are a couple things that I did. One tool I have searches the closed captions from all the big TV news agencies. I type in Burkina Faso and Christians, looking for any coverage of this. Nothing. I also did broader searches about Christians in Africa, violence against Christians in various places in the world. I have this one tool that lets me search a bunch of major news organizations. The emptiness on this is stunning. I'm not saying there's zero coverage. If you search, you might find mentions buried here and there. But there's a reason you probably have not heard about this. They're not covering it, not with any kind of prominence. And here is where this gets worse. They actively seek out something that is the opposite of all this. On this show, I often point to the media's anti-Israel bias. I had no plans on going there for this. But then when I searched for attacks on Christians, any coverage in the news, do you know what I kept finding? Anytime these big mainstream news organizations think they can find a way to somehow say that Israel did something bad to some Christian person somewhere, suddenly that's news. The bias is so obvious and so clearly offensive to Christians. Here's an example. I searched the NPR website for stories over the past 12 months. And again, it's like nothing, except when they can somehow make Israel a bad guy on this. Israel, in which Christian people have democratic equal rights, unlike the entire rest of MENA, Middle East, and North Africa. 2 stories popped up from a woman I used to work with, actually, back when we were both at CNN, Jane Araf. In Lebanon, the terrorist group Hezbollah is bigger and more powerful than the Lebanese army. This terrorist group basically has its own state within a state. Hezbollah has launched tons of rocket attacks. They were the ones who killed those 12 Druze children in Israel who were playing soccer. Israel has fought back. Jane Araf went and visited an area of Beirut that Israel hit. It happened to be what she described as a Christian area, where she spoke with a young woman.
She said neighbors had banged on the door at 6 a.m, telling them to get out. Israel had issued a warning that they were going to bomb the area.
Hey, Jane, name all the other countries that warn people to get out before they destroy terrorist infrastructure. Oh, that's right, you can't, because there aren't any, which a CNN military analyst discussed with me when I interviewed him for an earlier episode. Anyway, Jane also did this report from Lebanon about the death of a Hamas terrorist.
There are church bells tolling. It's a Muslim funeral. Hamas is a conservative Sunni Muslim group, but this town is both Muslim and Christian. And Mohammed Jabara was a son of this community, says a town official.
The headline for that report on the website reads, "In a Lebanese town, Muslims and Christians honor a Hamas fighter." Of course, they left out the word terrorist, by the way. So here is what we have. NPR relatively ignoring the millions of Christian people facing attacks from Islamist terrorists. But NPR rushing to cover some Christian people, apparently, who are honoring Islamist terrorists. It's like they're actively trying to offend Christian people. If you're being attacked by Islamists, we don't care. But if we can find someone who likes an Islamist terrorist and is Christian, then we'll come right over and tell the world about that. This brought me back to something a woman told me in an earlier episode. Anat Sultan Dadon, the Israeli consul general to the southeastern United States. She was talking about the media's obsession with Israel.
I'm not saying that this war Israel is fighting against a terror organization should not be covered. It should be covered because Israel is on the front line of fighting a radical Islamist ideology that is a threat to the entire free world. But are other issues around the world not worthy of attention? Is the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, in Africa, and so many places around the world, is that not worthy of being covered? We all deserve better because to a large extent, the media has a role in shaping public discourse, in shaping policy, in shaping what decision makers deal with.
We need decision makers, including lawmakers, to be aware of this and taking action. See, all of this hits home. It's easy to think, well, these places are far away. I mean, depending where you're listening from. But all of these problems are coming here. They're already spreading through Europe and to the United States. Here is a report from KTVU earlier this year.
The Islamic State terrorist group claimed responsibility today for the mass stabbing in Germany that left 3 dead and 8 injured. The group said the attacker targeted Christians and a suspect has been taken into custody. Police also arrested a 15-year-old boy for allegedly knowing about the planned attack, but not informing authorities.
And CBS did report about this from Idaho.
An Idaho teenager is facing federal terrorism charges for an alleged plan to attack churches in the name of ISIS. The Justice Department says the 18-year-old was arrested on Saturday, just 1 day before launching a plot where he planned to use guns, knives, and flammable chemicals.
There's a group called MEMRI. It's MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, which tracks Islamist threats. Here are just some of their headlines from this year. Islamic State African affiliates kill 7 Christians in 6 attacks on villages and gold mine, burn dozens of homes and churches. In 2-week span, Islamic State African affiliates kill at least 42 Christians, burn over 70 homes in 12 attacks on villages in Democratic Republic of the Congo and Mozambique. Islamic State Central Africa Province, we killed over 60 Christians by beheading in northeastern Congo. If the mainstream media keeps ignoring this, it will only get worse. So, why does the media keep giving it barely any attention? That is coming up. And I refuse to be all depressing at the holidays. So also coming up is a hopeful, happy message for peace and good tidings. At this time of year, I like to give tips to people who in some way contribute something to my life or the lives of people in my family, and people who are doing good things, creating good things to try to make the world a little bit better. I know that my little contribution to them means more than that same amount will mean to me in the next, food delivery to my house or something. And I hear from people so often saying that this show means something to them. So there is a tip system in which you can help contribute to the expenses of this show with one link that you'll find in the show notes. And it's at my website, joshlevs.com, JOSHLEVS.com. You will see where you can contribute any amount. So whether it's the amount that you would spend on your next coffee, that's something I used to say often during Pledge Drive. You can contribute as much as 1 cup of coffee per week. Each contribution means so much. I see all the notes that come along with them of any size. I reach out personally to say thank you, and I will. That means a great deal. And here is another way that you can also support this show. Sponsor the Media Fail Awards. This is cool. I want to send actual physical awards to the winners or losers of this. Yes, they'll probably toss them out, but in that moment, when they're opening it and seeing it, it will register. Executives know about this show, and people inside news agencies have been telling me that there's conversations about it, but we need to do everything we can to reach people. And setting physical awards, well, that takes money and time. So here's what you can do. You can become a founding member of this show. That's a status sent the newsletter that gives you special perks and messages read on the air and all kinds of other things. Each person who joins as a founding member between now and the end of the year, so December 31st, will be covering the cost of a physical award being sent out. And if you want to include a note to the executives of that news outlet, just let me know. I know from my years inside mainstream media that this kind of thing makes a difference. The word awards itself makes everyone's ears perk up. And now that we're doing this, well, it's going to break through. But we need your support. And if you don't want the newsletter, that's okay. You can also support directly. There's a link in the show notes and at my website for that too. Early on in this show, I explained that some news executives know their coverage is skewed. Admit off the record why. They want people in Muslim nations to watch, to listen, to buy into whatever it is that they're selling. And they want folks there to work with their people. So they're actively trying to appeal to people whom they know are radicalized. And there's hypocrisy because mainstream news outlets criticize right-wing outlets for doing this. They say you're radicalizing people with lies and you're trying to appeal to people who are radicalized and you're radicalizing them more. Okay, so are you. On another note, with Christmas coming up this week, will the media finally get something basic right? Virtually every Christmas and Easter, some folks in the media say this nonsensical, ahistorical thing. Here's an example. This was Joy Reid, of course, on MSNBC earlier this year, just before Easter.
Jesus of Nazareth, a Palestinian Jewish carpenter.
Ugh, no, he wasn't. This is not about beliefs. It's just history. A member of the people of Israel, a person in Judea, Jewish, at that time, was not a Palestinian. That's not an opinion or a theory. It's just a fact. Church leaders have called on people to stop saying this, but people keep saying it anyway for their own political purposes. There is a historian and professor of scripture at Boston University, Paula Friedrichsen, who wrote about this in an op-ed for the Washington Post.
There was no political entity called Palestine in his lifetime. If Jesus was born in Bethlehem, he was born in Judea as a Jew. He certainly died as one under Rome's heavy hand, the political condition that led to the two Jewish revolts. It was Roman colonizers who changed the name of Judea to Palestine. Now, even Jesus is being enlisted for attacks on Israel. Calling Jesus a Palestinian or even a Palestinian Jew is all about modern politics. Besides being historically false, The claim is inflammatory. For 2 millennia, Jews have been blamed for Jesus' execution by the Romans. Casting him as a Palestinian just stokes the fires of hate.
Sadly, sometimes fact-checking has to happen in the op-ed section because that is where external contributors can submit pieces. I know because I do pieces like that all the time. By the way, there are even people who go further and try to say that Jesus was Muslim. Yes, they really do say that. In my newsletter, you can see something I put up on Instagram about this, a group of Christians here in the United States asking people to please cut it out. But of course, that craziness continues. It's not just Christmas this week. It's also the start of Hanukkah, not a major holiday in a religious sense for Jewish people like me, but the best known holiday for Jewish people here in America. And it gives Jewish kids and Jewish people a way to celebrate at wintertime when so many other people are celebrating Christmas. Anyway, the Hanukkah story is actually a Civil War story. Jewish people who turned on the Jews and were trying to make them stop being different and give up their beliefs and be like this dominant society that opposed them. As you might have heard me talk about in my October 7th episode, which was a recording of a speech I gave, by continuing to exist, Jewish people show that a minority that does not go around proselytizing, does not try to force people to be like them, can remain a minority and still survive. That's a beautiful thing. It should also serve as a reminder to the media that there is nothing new about there being some Jewish people who turn on the Jewish people. That's what you're seeing when some of these crazies in college encampments and stuff spouting lies and anti-Semitism proclaim that they are Jewish. The media should understand that a group of Jewish people who oppose Am Yisrael, who stand against the Jewish people and their right to live with self-determination and all that, well, that's just Jewish people engaging in bigotry against Jews. So in this holiday that you have heard of, media called Hanukkah, there is a story of Jewish people standing against the Jews and being wrong. So stop acting like Jewish people who join anti-Semitic movements are somehow right. Finally, Kwanzaa starts this week too. I reached out to an old editor of mine, Sharon Ball, from my early days at NPR. She was one of the best teachers of any kind that I've ever had. When I was new to journalism, just starting out, I did a bunch of stories with her, and she taught me a lot. I was doing a story about Kwanzaa and what it means to people, and she said everyone you talk to is going to try to speak on a general community level. They'll say, here's what it means to us. She said, don't let them. Instead, pin them down on what it means individually to them. Ultimately, that's where the story lies. And she's right, and that applies to journalism in general. People so often, when you interview them, they want to talk in generalities. They want to claim that they speak for lots of people. But unless they're a spokesperson for an organization or an elected leader of a group or whatever, they don't speak for others. That was a great thing I learned from her, and she was absolutely right. So, Sharon, thank you. To everyone who is committed to accepting differences, including different beliefs and what are these days referred to as religions, everyone who is committed to living together in peace based on truth and justice, I wish you a merry, happy, joyous Christmahanakwanzika Festivus. Or if you don't have any particular holidays this week, happy wintertime. Unless you're in the Southern Hemisphere, in which case, happy summertime. I was in Australia once on Christmas, actually. That was fun. Summertime with all the Winter Wonderland songs playing. Next week, I will pop in with the results of your vote for the Media Fail Awards. So go right now to MediaFailAwards.com and get in your votes. You can vote until December 27th. Have terrific holidays if you celebrate them. Have a terrific week, even if you don't. And I will see you next week. Here are 2 free ways that you can help this show. 1, we need you to rate and review on all the podcast platforms. Just look at whatever app you use on your phone to listen to podcasts. In most cases, you will find that there's a way that you can rate and or review. When you give the show 5 stars, when you write something great about it, you are triggering those algorithms, telling them that people are interested in this and that they should tell other people about it. It also does this funky thing where it gets a sense of the kinds of podcasts that you like to listen to in general, and it's more likely to recommend to people who listen to those other podcasts that they should also check out this one. So, free way to spread the truth there. Also, at just about all times, I am asked to help spread the word on some other great things, like terrific websites or podcasts you should check out, or petitions you might want to sign. Because of a paid sponsorship, when you use my unique links, a little bit of money comes to this show and helps cover the expenses of this show. It's free, it's easy, and it's in the show notes, which means it's probably right there in your hand. Just click for that information, or you can see it in the newsletter. Thank you.